Dust rolled low across the dry plains as the wagon lurched toward Red Hollow, the wheels groaning under the weight of a fate she never chose. The sun pressed hard against Ruby's back, hot enough to burn straight through her thin dress. Her heartbeat thudded loud in her ears, fast and frightened, while the lonely farmer beside her kept his eyes fixed on the road. His jaw was tight. His hands were steady. His silence was heavier than chains. Ruby didn't know what waited for her at his ranch. Work. Cruelty. Something worse. All she knew was this. She belonged to him now. But would he treat her like property, or would something far more unexpected unfold? Ruby had been 19 for just 3 quiet weeks when her father traded her away like a worn-out plow. Barefoot in the yard of the broken-down house she'd grown up in, she kept her eyes on the dirt as Calvin Ridgeway, the farmer who'd come to take her, stood waiting with arms crossed and expression fixed in stone. Her father, Warren, reeked of whiskey and dust. Lines of anger cut deep into his face. Years of disappointment carved into every wrinkle. He glared at Ruby the way a rancher might look at a useless mule. Never wanted a girl, Warren spat, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. Girls ain't worth a damn out here. Just mouths to feed. Ruby kept her head down. She didn't cry. She'd learned long ago that tears only earn more bruises. Across from Warren stood Calvin. Tall. Broad-shouldered. Sunburnt from years of ranch work. His eyes a cool slate gray, never softened. He watched Warren, listened to the cruel words, but didn't speak. "I'm selling her for that Red Bull and $50, Warren said flatly. "Take her and we're even." Inside the sagging doorway, Ruby's mother, Mina, wept silently. A fresh bruise marked her jaw. Warren's final warning before the deal was made. Calvin didn't look at Mina. Didn't look at Ruby either. "Deal's a deal," he muttered. "I need help on the ranch. I expect work, not whining." Those were the last words spoken before Ruby climbed onto his wagon and left everything she had ever known behind. The ride to Calvin's land felt endless. The sky stretched wide, blue, and unforgiving. Ruby sat rigid beside him, hands folded tight in her lap as the leather reins creaked and the wagon wheels rattled over dry ground. Calvin didn't speak. Didn't glance her way. His silence felt colder than any winter wind. When the ranch finally came into view, Ruby's breath caught. It spread across the plains like its own small country. Rolling grass. Fenced fields. Cattle dotting the horizon. The house stood tall and sturdy, built from old timber that had weathered decades. Calvin stepped down first, then waited for Ruby to follow. His face gave nothing away. "This is Red Hollow Ranch," he said. "You work hard, you eat. You slack off, you go back where you came from. I don't run a charity." Ruby's stomach twisted, but she nodded. Before she could reply, a young man stepped out from the barn. Sunlight caught his sandy hair as he grinned warmly at her. "Howdy," he said, tipping his hat. "Name's Mason. Welcome to the ranch." His voice held kindness. Softness. Something Ruby hadn't heard in years. For the first time since leaving home, she felt the faintest spark of hope. The first weeks nearly crushed her. Ruby woke before dawn, pushing her aching body through chores she'd never been taught. Milking cows. Hauling well water. Sweeping porches. Kneading dough. Tending the garden. Her hands blistered and bled, but she kept moving. The sun burned her fair skin until it peeled. Every muscle screamed with pain. Calvin watched her like a man judging livestock. "You're slow," he'd mutter. "Too slow." But he never raised a hand. He never yelled. He simply expected. Ruby learned fast. She forced herself to, because if she failed here, she had nowhere else on earth to go. What she didn't know was that Calvin had begun to notice her grit. He saw the way she bit down frustration. The way she pushed through exhaustion. The way she hummed softly when she thought no one listened. Mason noticed too. He helped her whenever he could. lifting heavy buckets, fixing broken tools, offering quiet jokes that made her smile without meaning to. He spoke of his mother, who'd died young, leaving Calvin to raise him alone. Pa wasn't always so closed off, Mason said one evening. Losing Ma changed him. Ruby listened, trying to understand the man who owned her fate. One brutal morning, as Ruby struggled with a stubborn cow named Millie, Calvin approached her for the first time without judgment in his eyes. He stepped close enough for Ruby to feel the heat from his body. "Hold your hands steady," he said quietly. He placed his rough palms over hers, guiding her motions. "Firm but gentle. She's gotta trust you." Ruby froze. The warmth of his hand surprised her. His voice, normally cold, held the softest hint of something else. "Thank you," she whispered. Calvin stepped back fast, clearing his throat. "Just don't waste good milk." But Ruby had seen it. A flicker of the man beneath the armor. As summer turned toward autumn, life shifted. Ruby still worked hard, but she no longer felt like a ghost haunting the ranch. Mason made her laugh. Calvin watched her with eyes that seemed less sharp, less distant. And then came his birthday. Ruby planned for days. Collecting wildflowers. Baking bread. Slow cooking a roast. She wanted to give back something she couldn't name. Something he had quietly begun to give her. A feeling of safety. When Calvin walked into the warm glow of candlelight, the table set with care, he froze. "What's all this?" he asked. "It's your birthday," Ruby said softly. "I thought you deserved something special." Calvin sat slowly, emotion working in his throat. "It's good," he said. Coming from him, it felt like poetry. As they ate, walls began to crumble. Calvin spoke of his childhood. His losses. The wife he'd buried. The fear of loving again. Ruby reached across the table, laying her hand gently on his. "You're not alone anymore," she whispered. And for the first time, he didn't pull away. The days after Calvin's birthday felt different, though nothing was said aloud. The work stayed the same. Ruby still rose before dawn. Still scrubbed floors, cooked meals, and helped Mason with the stock. The Texas sun still burned hot over Red Hollow Ranch, and the wind still carried dust across the open yard. But something quiet had changed between Ruby and the man who owned the land. He no longer watched her like a hired hand he wished he could replace. Now his eyes followed her with a kind of weary respect, as if he was afraid to look too close and just as afraid to look away. One morning, Calvin stepped onto the porch while she swept the boards. "You ever been on a horse proper?" he asked. Ruby paused, fingers tight on the broom. "No, sir," she said. "My pa never saw fit to teach me." Calvin nodded once. "Finish that up and meet me by the corral." Her heart beat faster as she watched him walk away. Mason caught her eye from the yard and grinned. "You'll be fine," he said. "Pa's a better teacher than he lets on." Ruby wasn't so sure. At the corral, a chestnut mare waited, ears flicking, reins looped over the post. Calvin stood beside her, one hand resting on the horse's neck. "This is Daisy," he said. "She's gentle, if you are. Put your foot here." He held the saddle steady as Ruby tried to mount. She slipped once, heat climbing into her cheeks, but his hand closed around her waist, steady and strong, guiding her up. For a moment, she felt the full strength of him. The warmth of his touch. The safety of it. Then she was in the saddle, gripping the horn tight. "Easy," Calvin said. "You don't have to strangle her. Hold her like you would hold a scared bird. Firm, but not cruel." He walked beside the mare as they circled the pen. Ruby's legs shook at first, but his calm voice soothed her. "You're leaning too far forward," he said. "Sit tall. Trust her." "I'm trying," she answered. "I know," he said. Something in his tone made her chest ache. It sounded almost like pride. Day after day, they rode a little farther. First just around the corral. then to the edge of the pasture where the cattle grazed. Then out across the open range, with Mason sometimes riding ahead or trailing behind, whistling to the dogs. Ruby began to feel the rhythm of the horse beneath her. The wind tugged at her hair. The flat line of the horizon no longer looked like a wall, but like a promise. One afternoon, as the sky burned soft gold, Calvin turned his horse toward a narrow path Ruby had never seen before. "Where are we going?" she asked. "To a place I don't show many folks," he said. "Figured you earned it." They rode single file through a gap in the low hills. The air grew cooler. The sound of water whispered ahead, soft at first, then stronger. When they stepped out of the brush, Ruby's breath left her. Before them lay a small valley, hidden from the wide world. A clear stream ran over rock, falling in a gentle sheet into a pool that shone like glass. Wildflowers dotted the grass. Tall trees cast cool shade over the bank. Calvin dismounted and tied his horse to a branch. Ruby followed, moving slowly, afraid she might wake from a dream. "This is where I came as a boy," he said. "When things were hard at home. When I needed air that didn't smell like anger." He sat on a flat stone near the water. Ruby sat beside him, close enough to feel the warmth of his arm. "Did you come here after your wife died?" she asked quietly. Calvin's jaw worked. He stared at the water for a long moment. "Yes," he said. "Brought Mason here too, when he was little. Told him it was a place where the world got quieter. But after she passed, even this place felt heavy." The sound of the falls filled the space between them. "I know something of heavy places," Ruby said. "My father's house was one." Calvin turned his head. "Did he ever show you kindness?" She shook her head. "Not that I can recall." "What about your ma?" "Ma tried," Ruby said. "She just didn't have much left in her to fight with. She loved me the best she knew how." Calvin watched her face. "You deserved better," he said. The words were simple. They landed deep. "No one ever said that to me," Ruby whispered. He reached out on instinct, his hand covering hers where it rested on the stone. His fingers were rough, scarred by work and weather, but his touch was gentle. "I'm saying it now," he replied. Ruby's heart pounded. The sound of the waterfall faded beneath the thud of her pulse. She lifted her eyes to his, searching his face. For once, he didn't look away. When he leaned in, it was slow, almost careful, as if he was giving her time to pull back. Ruby did not. Their lips met in a kiss that was soft and uncertain at first, then deeper, filled with everything neither of them knew how to say. He pulled back, breath unsteady. "I'm not good at this," he said. "I don't know how to love without feeling like I might lose it all again." Ruby swallowed, her hands still clasped in his. "Then we learn," she said. "Together. One day at a time." A faint, almost shy smile touched his mouth. It made him look younger. Less burdened. "Together," he echoed. They did not hurry to leave that place. They talked until the sun dipped low, sharing pieces of themselves they had hidden for years. Ruby spoke of nights she'd gone to bed hungry so her mother could eat. Calvin told her how fear had turned him hard. How guilt over his wife's death had built walls he could not tear down alone. Before they left, he walked to his saddlebags and pulled out a small cloth bundle. Inside was a tiny sapling, its roots wrapped in damp burlap. "What's that?" Ruby asked. "Apple tree," he said. "Picked it up in town. Meant to put it near the house. Now I think it belongs here." He knelt and began to dig a small hole near the water's edge, using his hands to scoop out the dark soil. Ruby joined him, fingers sinking into the cool earth. They set the young tree in place, pressing the dirt back around its roots. "Why here?" she asked. Calvin looked at the fragile green leaves. "Because this is where I started to feel something I thought was gone for good," he said. "Seems right that something new should grow here." Ruby blinked hard as her eyes filled. A few tears slipped free and fell onto the fresh-packed ground. "Sorry," she said, wiping them away quickly. "Don't be," he answered. Water just helps it take hold. They stood when the light began to fade, side by side, staring at the small tree that marked their quiet promise. The pool reflected the sky. The wind whispered through the leaves. On the ride back to Red Hollow Ranch, Ruby's heart felt fuller than it ever had. The land no longer seemed like a cage. It felt like it might be home. But as the house came into view, warm lamplight shining through the windows, a small, sharp fear slipped into her chest. She had been given away once, like a thing that belonged to someone else. Now, for the first time, she dared to hope she might belong by choice. The thought was beautiful. And it was terrifying. Spring rolled across Red Hollow Ranch with warm winds and fields of blooming color. Life felt lighter now, filled with quiet joys Ruby had never imagined possible. She and Calvin moved through their days with an easy closeness. They worked side by side. They rode together at dusk. Sometimes they ended evenings on the porch, talking softly while the sun dipped behind the far hills. The change in Calvin was slow but steady. He still carried the weight of old hurts, but the hardness that once wrapped around him had begun to soften. Ruby saw it in the way he paused before speaking now, as if searching for gentleness. She saw it in the way he watched her, careful and steady, as though he was learning how to keep something precious safe. Mason noticed too. "You've done Possum good," he said one morning while fixing a fence. Ruby smiled, shaking her head. "I didn't do anything." Mason wiped sweat from his brow. "You did more than you know." As days passed into weeks, Ruby found herself becoming part of the very fabric of the ranch. She helped with decisions. Tended the garden with skill. Even took over running the kitchen. The men looked to her with respect. Mason teased her like a sister. Calvin depended on her presence more than his pride would ever admit aloud. But it wasn't until late summer that Ruby understood how deeply she and Calvin had grown together. They were riding out near the far pasture when Calvin slowed his horse, glancing her way. "Ruby," he said, his voice low. "There's something I've been meaning to ask." Her heart jumped. "What is it?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he guided her toward the small valley where their apple tree stood. The tree had taken root, its leaves bright and strong under the afternoon sun. Seeing it there made Ruby's throat tighten. Calvin dismounted first, then helped her down. His hands lingered at her waist, just a breath longer than usual. "I've lived most of my life thinking love only ends in loss," he said quietly. "I thought I wasn't fit for anything soft. But you..." He paused, steadying himself. "You brought something back I thought was dead." Ruby felt tears rising, but this time they didn't scare her. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small wooden ring box. The breath rushed out of her. "I ain't a man of fancy words," Calvin said. "But if you'll take me as I am, I'd be proud to build a life with you. Will you marry me?" Ruby pressed her hand to her mouth. The valley, the air, the whole world felt hushed. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Calvin." He let out a breath like he'd been holding it for years. When he pulled her into his arms, she felt the strength of him, the hope in him. It was the safest place she'd ever known. The wedding took place the next spring beneath the shade of the apple tree. It had grown taller, its branches spreading wide as if reaching toward the life blooming around it. Mason stood proudly at Calvin's side, tears slipping down his cheeks as vows were spoken. "I promise," Calvin said, voice thick with emotion, "to love you with all I've got, for every day the good Lord gives me." Ruby's hands trembled as she lifted her eyes to his. "And I promise to stand beside you," she said softly. "To build a home with you. To love this land and this family with my whole heart." As the small gathering clapped and cheered, a figure stepped out from the road. Slow. Unsure. Dressed in her best Sunday dress. Ruby froze. "Mama." Mina, her mother, stood with tears streaming down her worn face. Ruby ran into her arms. Mina clung to her, shaking with relief. "Your father's gone," Mina whispered. "Gone and buried by his own bitterness. I sold the old place. I came here hoping you'd let me start over too. Ruby's heart ached, but it was a tender ache. You're home now, Mama. Calvin stepped forward, removing his hat out of respect. There's room for you here, he said simply. And there was. A year later, as autumn swept across the plains in copper and gold, Ruby brought life into the world. A son with soft hair and a cry strong enough to shake every heart on the ranch. Calvin held their newborn with trembling hands, his rough thumbs brushing the child's cheeks. We'll name him Samuel, Ruby said. After your father. Calvin nodded, tears slipping down his weathered face. This boy will know love from day one, he whispered. He won't ever wonder if he's wanted. Ruby leaned against him, watching as Mason approached, eyes shining. Mina stood behind them, hand pressed to her heart. The ranch, once quiet and cold, now rang with laughter, footsteps, and the sound of a family learning joy together. Seasons passed, and the apple tree grew taller still. Its branches shaded picnics, cradled swings, and dropped fruit sweet enough to fill Ruby's kitchen with the smell of pies. Sometimes, when the sun sank low and painted the sky in soft purples and golds, Ruby stood on the porch with Samuel on her hip and Calvin's arm around her waist. She would look across the land that had once frightened her and think of the girl she'd been. Scared. Unwanted. Treated like a thing. That girl was gone. In her place stood a woman who had built a home out of broken pieces and found love where she least expected it. Funny, Calvin said one evening, kissing her forehead. How the darkest days can lead us right where we're meant to be. Ruby smiled, leaning into him. Yes, she whispered. Sometimes the story starts in the hardest place, but ends exactly where the heart needs to go. Because broken beginnings could grow into something beautiful. Because love could take root even in the hardest soil. Because she had found her home, not in a house, not in land, but in the people who chose her day after day. And the ranch that once felt like a prison had become the place where her whole life bloomed. If this story touched something deep in your heart, don't forget to like and subscribe to From Wild West 2, where every tale carries the dust, the heartache, and the kind of love that changes everything. See you in the next story, partner.